Hi guys! Thank you all for tuning in and welcome back to Sewing Clara. Today we are going to create together these cute scented items. So they are all filled with lavender blossoms. They smell wonderful, and the great thing is that they can be refilled because they all have a zipper. So the turtle has a zipper on the belly, the heart has a zipper on its back, and the purse can be opened and closed here on the top. So whenever the scent starts fading, you could always refill them with fresh lavender leaves. And they make wonderful birthday or Christmas gifts. And in addition to that, they are so much fun to make. I'm sure you're gonna love this. So the list of sewing supplies and materials is, as always, in the video description. So once you have all your materials and sewing supplies ready, we can start. Let's start with something simple. So I have here these two heart shapes. This is going to be the back side, already stitched in a zipper, and this is going to be the front side. I made my marks. I want to stitch on beads, and I'll do that after I stitch these pieces together. So if that were an embroidery and I would want to embroider this with a denim yarn or embroidery yarn, I would go ahead and do that first. I personally find that it's easier to stitch on beads after the pieces have been stitched together. You could stitch them on first, but you would have to make sure that you stay away from the edge, from the seam allowance. So you would have to make a mark where your seam is going to be, and you would have to start stitching here. But I find that sometimes I'm not precise and then there would be gaps, or sometimes I go a little bit too far, and that's why I find it easier to stitch on beads after the two pieces were stitched together. But it's all about personal preference, whatever works for you. If you don't know how to stitch on zippers, there's a tutorial as a part of this course, so I would suggest you watch that first and you can come back to this video after you learn that. And now all I have to do is to put these pieces together like so. And I'm gonna be pinning them in place at an angle. If it's easier for you, you can do it from this side where the zipper is. I will make a mark for my stitch because I find it much easier to keep the shape when I have a clear guide. Definitely something that's helpful no matter how advanced you are. And now I will stitch these two pieces together with a back stitch, and since you already know how that works, let's do that with the help of editing magic. Done being backstitched. So one thing you have to keep in mind is that you want to be able to turn your piece to the right side after you're done with stitching the edges together. So always make sure that the zipper is open before you start stitching. And since I made sure that the zipper was open, we will be able to turn it. But before we do that, I will cut back this edge very close to the pointy end of the stitch. And I will also cut here to the pointy part of the stitch here on the top so that I can shape my heart then better. And now we can start turning the heart to the right side. So first I'll do it just with my fingers. And then I will grab here, I have here a crayon, and I will push it in and start shaping the heart nicely. Especially here in the middle, and with the pointy end I will shape the bottom. For the time being I'm gonna close the zipper and I will start rolling these edges back and forth until I'll be happy with the shape. I can always grab a pin and pull on the edges and kind of pull the seam a little bit out, so that the round parts will be nicely shaped. I'm gonna go with the crayon over the marks because I wiped them away a little bit. And now I will grab my pins and I will start pinning around the edges at an angle because I want to stitch a few millimeters away from the edges. You can do it with back stitch, with chain stitch, or with simple running stitch. I think I'm just gonna stick to simple running stitch because it's faster. For the running stitch, I'm gonna take this yellow denim yarn because I'm gonna be using them golden beads, and I think that's gonna go well with that. So I double threaded my needle. Now I can open the back side because that way I can easily hide the knot. And I will come somewhere here through with the yarn, and then I will start doing my running stitch. I will make sure that the stitches are as equally long as possible, and since the denim yarn is a yarn that likes to tangle, I will simply take my time, especially at the beginning when it's quite long, and I will often wrap it around my fingers as I pull it through, and I will make sure that it doesn't get tangled into the pins. And now the running stitch is done, and I have here these little golden beads and beading needles, and I can start stitching the beads on these lines. And that's the finished product. I decided to stitch the beads on the edge as well because I thought that it looked kind of naked. So now you can see the yellow running stitch only from the back side. And I have stitched on the invisible yarn here. You can't really see it, but I made it pretty long. So the person who's gonna get it can then cut it back to the length they need. But they can hang it either on a Christmas tree or somewhere on the edge of the bed or on the wall. And the only thing that's left is to turn this around and to fill it with the lavender blossoms. I put a sheet of paper on my table so that when I start filling the heart with the lavender blossoms, whatever gets spilled will be nicely collected on the paper, and it's so much easier to get it back to the packaging. And we can start. So I like to basically spill it like so over the opening, and then I push the blossoms in the furthest sections, so the rounded sections of the heart. And once they have been filled, I'm just gonna do this. Turn it around and then start stuffing the pointy end. It's a mess, but you can then later brush it off and clean it a little bit just to get the dust of the lavender leaves also away. And I will keep filling it till the heart is properly stuffed so that it's nice and chunky. And I always make sure that it's properly stuffed up to the edges. Now we are going to make the little scented purse. So I have here this checked fabric. I made sure that when I cut out the rectangle that this section would be centered so that the purse would be symmetrical once I'll be done with that. I have here a hidden zipper which I already shortened, and I made a new zipper stopper on the bottom. More about that in the tutorial about how to stitch in zippers. Then I have here two pieces of cord which are going to be my handles for the purse. You could use, instead of a cord, a bias tape. So when we will be stitching on these, I will show you how you could do it with the bias tape instead, so that you have an option. And then once I stitch on the handles, I want to have on each side a button. So you could use either these shank buttons or something similar, or instead of shank buttons, you can of course use flat buttons, which is something I want to use for this purse. and we can start. So first I will pin in the zipper. The good thing about this fabric is that these marks mark exactly where the zipper ends and where my seam is going to be. So this is going to be actually pretty easy. So I will pin the zipper first here, like so, right side to right side, even though the fabric does not really have a right side, but that's what we'll call it. So if that were a fabric with a print, or a fabric that had right side and wrong side, then now it would be facing right side up, and I'm pinning the zipper right side to the fabric for now. I'll grab the other side of this and I will pin in the zipper like so, and I will make sure that this will be nicely aligned, because at the end I want the center of the purse be perfectly aligned so that this line will be continuous in the middle. Now I will open the zipper and I will start pinning it in at an angle and folding the zipper teeth over so that it's gonna be easier to stitch the zipper on. Now that the zipper is stitched in place in a way that's going to be easier for me to stitch the zipper on, I will grab my needle, I will double thread it and stitch very close to the zipper teeth, but still far enough so that the pull tab wouldn't get caught in the thread. I stitched the zipper in with a back stitch, and now when I close it and turn the piece to the right side, here's what it looks like. I'm going to turn this again to the wrong side, because now I want to finish stitching these ends of the purse. I find that it's easier to open the zipper at least a little bit and then aligning the end like so. And you will here see where your stitch ended, and that's where you want to continue stitching. You want to close this upper end. So you can of course grab a crayon and make a mark so that you know where to stitch, and I'm gonna stitch this on both sides with a back stitch. So I'm gonna mark it here as well. I'm kind of lifting a little bit the end of the zipper because I find it easier. Then I'll put in a pin and I'll make a mark so that you can see where I want to be stitching. And now I'll finish this upper edge. So again, with just back stitch, and then we'll take it from there. All right, the edges are stitched in place. So when I turn the purse now to the right side, you can see that this whole edge is now nicely closed. So I'm gonna turn the piece again to the wrong side, and I will make sure that I keep the zipper open, because later we want to be able to turn the purse to the right side. And if the zipper were closed, that would suck. And the good thing about this fabric is that it has here these red lines, which are actually exactly the marks that I need for my seam. So that's gonna make my life a little bit easier. If you don't use a fabric with a pattern, or if the pattern is not as convenient as this one, you can of course also grab your sewing crayon or a pen and make a mark for yourself. And now I'll pin this in place. I will of course make sure that this section is nicely aligned on each side, because we don't want anything to be askew. And then I'll grab again my thread and I will stitch here through the red lines with the back stitch. So here you have it. And now I want to have the bottom shaped like the typical bottom of a purse. So I want to create here kind of two triangles that I will pin in place. So what I'm doing is I have the zipper here on the bottom, and this is the this side of the purse. This is how I'm holding it up. And now I'm pulling the sides apart, making sure that I stay centered, and for that this line is super helpful. Now I'm folding this seam to one side and I'll put in a pin. And now I want to make sure that these triangles are the same size. So either you hold them to each other like so, and you simply repin one so that it will be aligned with the other one. That's one way how to do it. Or before you even start folding anything, you will grab your measuring tape or your guide and you will measure the distance that you want to have from the seam where it's going to be the point of the triangle. So in my case, it's going to be 2 centimeters. So I'll make a mark on each side like so. I will turn my work around and do it also on this side, because then it's going to create a line. And now when you grab this and open the bottom like so, you already have your line here. So all you have to do is to put your pin in once you shape this. Make sure that you fold these seam allowances to the same side. And now when I hold these to each other, they will be exactly the same size. And now I'm gonna stitch through these lines with a back stitch. And now, since they are stitched through, I will fold them towards the center on the bottom, and I will stitch the point of the triangle to the bottom of the purse on a really small spot. And again, since I have here this line in the center, it makes it very easy for me because I don't have to measure anything. I don't have to find the center. But if you wouldn't have a fabric with a pattern or with a pattern that would work this way, you could always go ahead and make a line before you would start working on your piece. And at this point, you would still have your mark and it would be easier to find the center. Here is what the purse looks like from the wrong side. So you can see these seams on the sides have been folded to the same side when I made these triangles. Triangles are stitched in place with a few whip stitches, and since our zipper is open, we can easily turn the purse to the right side. So here is what the bottom looks like. And now I will grab my pen and I will shape the edges here on the top. Be careful when you shape the edges that you don't pinch anything through, so don't use anything too sharp. Something that is kind of pointy but still rounded at the end, so basically no sharp edges. And this is the purse now. So before we fill it with our lavender leaves, we will position these handles. So you can choose wherever you want to have them. I think I'm gonna position them so that they are actually on each side of this section. And I'm going to stitch them on simply with a whip stitch. And once I stitch the ends in, then I'm just gonna cover them with these buttons. Couple of tips. When you start stitching the cord in place, I find it easier when you have the opening on the left side to stitch on this button first, and this side of the handle first, and then this one, because the way I'm doing it now, the thread can get caught on this button and that can be annoying. It's not a bad thing, but if you can avoid it, if you think of it ahead of time, definitely better. Keep the purse open so that you can put your fingers inside. It's so much easier, and then you can also do the sew up from the inside. So first you stitch on the cord with the whip stitch. Then you move somewhere towards the center to the whip stitch. You still keep the thread in, and you simply chop off this frayed end. And then you can position your button, and you can stitch the button on any way you want to. If it's a flat button, I have decided to stitch it on so that the thread creates this rectangle in the center. That's just my personal preference for this project, but you can stitch it so that the thread would create two lines like so, or make a cross. That's of course entirely up to you. And again, since this is open here on the top, you can always easily pull the thread out on the wrong side and come back from the inside of the purse. So, and this is the finished product. So you can open the zipper and refill it then with fresh lavender leaves whenever necessary. Of course, you could use, as I said at the beginning, different buttons. So for example, these shank buttons, it would maybe look a little bit fancier, but it's all about personal preference. It's of course entirely up to you what buttons you would use. And now I will show you how to make handles of a bias tape. It's actually very easy. You would grab the bias tape and fold it in the middle, but you would leave out a little bit over an inch at the end. Pin it in place. Once you pinned the midsection of the bias tape together, it's always good to make marks at the end on each side so that you know how much should remain open. So I would do it here with this crayon. And then once you stitched the main section in place, you would simply open these ends like so, fold the end inwards, put a pin in it, and then stitch through with either running stitch or back stitch. To make it maybe a little bit more understandable, I have stitched through with simply running stitch in white thread. So you see what section is stitched through here. And then there are these two triangles at each end, and you see where the stitches are on each bottom and on all sides. And this is how you would position your handles on the purse. Here we have all the materials and supplies for our scented turtle. So these three pieces are for the panther. Then we have here these two pieces, that's for the belly. I have here a zipper for the belly, and then a lace that's gonna make a nice edge around the bottom. Then we have here the front legs, the back legs, the tail, and the head. I have here my needles, pins, scissors, several yarns, and these are stuffings. I'm gonna try to squeeze some of the stuffings into these pieces, and then we will fill it with lavender. So let's start. First, I want to pin all the parts for the panther together. So what I like doing is marking the center of these things. That's, in my opinion, always very helpful. And then I will mark the center on each side of the middle strip, because then it's easier to align the pieces. The cut that I'm making here is very little. It's actually a little bit smaller than the seam allowance. And now I have to pin the pieces so that the right sides will be always facing each other. So I find that it's easier to pin this way when I have the strip, the straight strip on the top. And then I'm kind of wrapping the rounded part around it. So I always like to pin first the ends, as you have seen, then I like pinning the center. And now the tricky part starts, because this is rounded, so you have to kind of play with it so that the fabric lays nicely flat. And it makes a difference if you pinning it like so or like so, because if I would be pinning it like so, then the fabric here on the side would wrinkle and it would feel as though the strip is not long enough. But when I pin it this way, you can clearly see that that's exactly the length I need. So now I will do the back stitch, and here we have it. So the first side of the shell is stitched in place. Now I will pin the other side in. I actually also just realized that I kept saying the wrong word for the shell of the turtle. I kept saying Panzer, which is not even an English word. That would be the word Panzer, comes from German and means the shell, or also a tank. So I will pin the other side of the shell in the same way. So you have seen I pinned the ends in. Now I have aligned the centers, and I will keep adding pins, and then I will create the back stitch as well. And now our turtle shell is done. You can leave it like so, or you could go ahead and create some kind of pattern with a chain stitch so that it looks more like a turtle shell. That is, of course, up to you. I decided I'm gonna do that. So I am going to fold this so that it's in the center. And I'm gonna take a crayon and make basically a straight mark in the center. So I put one pin in the center and then one on each side, 2 centimeters away from the center. And then I turned the shell on the inside, inside out, and I made here round marks with a pen. So I have kind of almost a circle in the middle, and that's what I'm gonna stitch with the chain stitch. And then I will kind of wing several additional sections again with the chain stitch. And I'm gonna be stitching with this denim yarn because it's thicker than the regular yarn. So I will also need a needle with a bigger eye. And I'll pinch the needle through here. I will pull out this pin so that I don't pinch myself, and then I will start creating the chain stitch. I will make sure I don't tighten it too much so that the sections would be nice. Now we need a zipper on the belly so that we can fill the turtle up with our stuffings and with the lavender leaves. If you want to learn more about this, there is a tutorial about stitching in zippers. Here's what it looks like so far. So the zipper is pinned in place. I already shortened it. I have here my needle and my polyester yarn. It's double threaded. I will tie the end and I will do the back stitch around the edge of the zipper. Now that the zipper has been stitched in place and the shell is ready, I can start pinning these small parts, the legs and the tail and the head together. And since this is felt, I didn't add any seam allowance, so I will simply stitch around the edges with a blanket stitch. And for that I have here this beige polyester yarn. And when all the small parts have been finished and stitched together with the blanket stitch, you can go ahead and push in a little bit of the stuffings I'm using here the end of a paintbrush because it's quite pointy but not sharp, so that I couldn't damage my piece. You could honestly also go without stuffing. It doesn't have to be stuffed. That is up to you. I think it looks good when it's stuffed at least a little bit, but that's of course personal preference. So if that's something you don't find appealing, you can simply leave these pieces flat. When you're stuffing these things, it's always best to take a little chunk at a time and push it in with the end of the brush. Maybe grab something a little bit bigger if the brush keeps simply sliding through. This is just a crayon. And then always what you have to do is to shape the piece and see whenever you achieve the thickness that you find appealing. I finished all the legs and the head and the tail. The tail is not stuffed because it's too tiny and it would be really too difficult to fill it with the stuffings. But the head and both front and back legs are stuffed a little bit, and you can see that I pinned them in place. So first I positioned the head and the tail, and then the best thing to do is to fold this in the middle, make sure that the head and the tail are centered, and then you can make sure that the legs are aligned so that they are pinned exactly in the same spot, both on the right and the left side. So I'm gonna leave that for a while. Now we're gonna continue working on the shell. So I have here this strip of lace that I wanna pin around the shell. I already measured it, and now I can grab it and stitch first this end together before I start pinning it in place. So the end of the lace is stitched in place. Now I folded the seam to one side, and I'm gonna stitch through with the back stitch so that it would stay nicely folded to the side. Now I will grab the lace and I will position it so that the right side of the lace band will face the right side of the shell, and I will start pinning it in place. And the way I'm pinning it in is quite loose, so you can see that I'm kind of stretching out the denim because I don't want the lace be too tight around the edge, because it's gonna be folded over the edge where the belly meets the shell, and I don't think it would look good if it would be too tight. So now this is pinned in place, and I'm going to turn the shell to the wrong side, and I will reposition the pins so that they are on the wrong side. You could have done this in the first place, but I just like doing it that way because that way I can really stretch the denim nicely so that the denim fits the size of the lace band. It just makes sense for me. Of course you can do it the other way around, but I don't mind doing the extra step because I find then that the lace is then positioned nicely. And now we have to stitch the shell to the belly with the head and all the other turtle body parts. So I'm gonna start pinning the shell to the belly like so. I'm basically taking out the pins that were in the head and in the legs, and I'm gonna place them from the top. But first I pinned in the head, and then I'm gonna pin in the tail like so, and then I will start pinning in the sides, because then I know that this is nicely centered. I will hold this leg in place with my thumb, position the shell on the top. You can pin this at an angle immediately, which is actually better, because I find it easier to stitch when things are pinned at an angle. And that's something where it makes sense to do it right away. All right, the shell is pinned to the bottom. And what you want to make sure is that you can everywhere see the edge of your lace band and that the zipper is open so that you'll be able to turn the turtle to the right side. And now all you have to do is to thread your needle, and you can start doing backstitch around the edges. Make sure you keep the same distance and try to make the stitches as equal as possible. I'm done with the backstitch. What I like doing before I turn my piece to the right side, I like grabbing all these loose threads here and cutting them away. And now, are you ready? So let's do this. And there you have it, there's our turtle. Now we have to fill it with the lavender blossoms. And here's what the turtle looks like once it has been stuffed sufficiently with the lavender leaves. I made sure I stuffed it well so that the shell would be nicely shaped. So here's what it looks like from the top, and here's the turtle from the bottom, so you can anytime open the belly and take out the lavender leaves, the lavender blossoms, and refill them with fresh ones. So these are all the scented items. I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I think these are great gifts, but also great to make for yourself, because they smell wonderful. You could, for example, have the turtle on your nightstand, so whenever you go to bed you would smell the wonderful scent of lavender, and you could hang a heart like this or a little purse like this on a coat hanger inside of your wardrobe. And that is it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and that it has been helpful. Thank you all for tuning in, and happy sewing!